Why my eyes, sir? You've never used them before.
In 1975, the movie Logan's Run hit theaters, garnering an Oscar for MGM Studios and a staggering $50 million in box office revenue. It stands as one of the highest-grossing films of its time. The story depicts a future society controlled by a centralized artificial intelligence, in which the population and consumption of resources are maintained in equilibrium by exterminating its citizens when they reach the age of 30. The city is self-contained, procreation is controlled, children are bred in hatcheries, there are no families, no marriages, and no ownership of property. The citizens are kept in this childlike state where the machine is the parent, and not just in the hatchery, but society as a whole is set up this way. The machine provides and decides everything. The culture is defined by this sort of folk hedonism, centered on sentient pleasures which include open sexuality and a variety of recreational intoxicants, and leave little room for contemplative thought. A long-dead machine programmer's idea of utopia, of heaven. To maintain the city, every resident must participate in carousel, a Colosseum-style ritual in which they are vaporized in midair, believing they have a chance to be renewed into a new body to enjoy another life cycle. To monitor this, humans are implanted with a life clock at birth, a crystal in their hand that functions as identification, a tracking device, and a biological clock that changes colors as they near their last day. While most people blindly accept the idea of last day and of renewal, concepts programmed into them from birth, and which sounds more like some kind of cloning lottery rather than a mystical reincarnation event, some, as they approach their last day, begin to realize that in reality it's a form of extermination for the sake of population and consumption control. These dissidents become fugitives known as runners, which the centralized AI system dispatches DS agents known as Sandmen to hunt down the runners and terminate them. Logan 5, after terminating a runner, finds in the runner's possession an Ankh. The Ankh seems to be a symbol used by an underground resistance group, which he discovers after meeting Jessica 6, who also wears the Ankh. Upon debriefing with the AI, he is assigned to penetrate city seals and seek sanctuary, a word that has been circulating among the resistance. The Ankh is a key that opens a door, giving them access to the outside, which first leads into a frozen cave inhabited by a cyborg named Box, whose job it is to capture the food supply and store it there. The food supply was
fish, plankton, sea greens, and protein from the sea.
But the food stopped coming, alluding to the idea that either the ocean has somehow died, or the AI system decided to keep everything in-house, if you know what I mean. And since this is the only door to the outside, the runners who paraded through there seeking sanctuary were captured by Box to be stored as food for the domed city. Logan 5 and Jessica 6 manage to elude Box, who is trying to turn them into food, and they finally get outside, seeing the sun for the very first time. As they make their way through the wilderness searching for sanctuary, they come upon the overgrown ruins of the capital. The story never discloses specifically what took place that sent a tiny segment of the population inside. They were told that a catastrophe rendered the outside world uninhabitable, but the opening statement alludes to war, overpopulation, and pollution, each playing a role in this process. While everything is overgrown and abandoned, there are no visible signs of these apocalyptic plagues. Was it a mind game all along? Looks that way to me. After discovering an old man who explains that he knows what happened to humanity, Logan and Jessica realize that there exists no place called sanctuary. Sanctuary is a myth.
There's nothing to go on to, Jessica.
Sanctuary. There is.
You want there to be one, but that doesn't...
It has to be. I know it exists. It has to
No,
be.
it doesn't. Not really.
They convince the old man to return to the Dome City with them so they can tell the others the truth. Once inside, they are captured by the Sandmen and taken to the AI computer, which engages Logan in deep interrogation. Logan has completed his mission as he was instructed to do, but insists there is no sanctuary, despite the AI fully scanning his brain. This conclusion simply does not compute. It does not program, causing the computer to malfunction and overload, bringing the city systems to fail, which opens the city seals to the outside. All the people emerge and see the old man outside, and the credits roll. The film Logan's Run is very loosely based on a book of the same title co-authored by William F. Nolan and George Clayton Johnson, but the book tells a very different story than the film. The only elements from the original story that remained were the government-mandated execution of every citizen at the age of 21 rather than 30 from the film. In the book, civilization seems to have evolved into enormous webs of uncontained but carefully designed smart cities. People were free to be outside and could travel anywhere, but everyone was tracked and traced. The rest of the story in the film version was invented by two screenwriters, Stanley R. Greenberg, who was initially commissioned for the project, and scriptwriter David Zelig Goodman, who picked up where Stanley left off. It was Stanley Greenberg who came up with the idea of carousel, of using sea greens and plankton and then later human flesh as a sustainable food source, which Goodman kept in the script. Greenberg is also known for his film Soylent Green, the 1973 ecological dystopian thriller that depicts a future world suffering from the effects of war, overpopulation, and pollution that caused worldwide food, water, and housing shortages, resulting in the climate going completely haywire and a complete breakdown of social order. The impoverished masses live in squalor, dependent upon a weekly ration of highly processed food wafers made by a single corporation given an exclusive government contract that gives them a monopoly on this commodity. If crowds get out of control in the food line, which happens frequently because the corporation/government keeps shorting the supply, they just scoop the people up into dump trucks and haul them away. Some citizens serve as indentured servants called quote-unquote furniture for the wealthy elite who can afford to live in spacious climate-controlled apartments and enjoy comforts such as natural food like meat and fresh fruit and vegetables and luxury commodities like sugar, coffee, and liquor. The story follows an NYPD detective named Thorne, played by Charlton Heston, as he discovers the synthetically created food wafers, which were supposed to be comprised of proteins from the sea, are made of recycled bodies of the deceased. The bodies are managed by a waste disposal plant just outside of the city, then transported to the Soylent factory and turned into food, which in the book that this film was loosely based upon were called quote-unquote Soylent steaks. Of course, this whole process is dominated and dictated by the Soylent Corporation's board members who have this lucrative contract with the world government and are willing to terminate anyone who might disclose this news to the public. Soylent Green is based on the book Make Room, penned by Harry Harrison. As in the case of Logan's Run, Greenberg made significant changes to the story for the screenplay. What portions did Greenberg add? Harrison's biographer, Paul Tomlinson, stated in an interview, quote, "Soylent Green isn't people and it isn't a miracle plankton food. It's soya beans and lentils. The clue is in the name," end quote. Deceased people as a sustainable food source and human slaves considered furniture were Greenberg inventions. In an interview in 1997, Harrison talks disparagingly about the screenplay and his views on the subject matter. Quote, "The worst thing was that I had no control over the screenplay. They bought it because it was the only overpopulation book that takes place tomorrow for people alive today," end quote. Stanley R. Greenberg was an American playwright and screenwriter, and I searched the entire net for a photograph of this man and came up empty. He's best known for pioneering the docudrama, a clever hybridization of documentary and dramatic reenactments of actual events in what he called quote-unquote theater of fact. It contains at least a kernel of truth combined with dramatic creative license that makes no commitment to be an accurate portrayal. In other words, it follows the same format as wartime propaganda. Greenberg wrote screenplays for several films and TV shows, which were mostly about spies and intelligence operatives.
He was once an agent for the CIA.
His name's McGill with a big M and a big G.
But what is this fixation with plankton, sea greens, and proteins from the sea? Perhaps Greenberg was influenced by elite and very influential occultist and author Christopher Hills. Born in the UK in 1926, Hills, at the start, was a wealthy and successful commodities trader and an art dealer. He was married to Nora Bremner, whose father, Bernard Bremner, was a magistrate and mayor and connected to the royal family. Hills moved to Jamaica and played an enormous role in their commerce, politics, culture, and art. Jamaica is a two-party political system, and Hills was close friends with the leaders of both political parties. Nevertheless, Hills created an alternative political party called the Agricultural and Industrial Party, which is now long defunct. In 1951, the Hills opened an elite art gallery with Jamaica's Prime Minister's wife, Edna Manley, which curated highbrow celebrity artists like Ian Fleming, who was also famous for his post-war spy novels, and other super famous highbrow artists, playwrights, and so on. Clientele of the gallery included Winthrop Rockefeller, Prince Sadruddin Aga Khan, who was a statesman and activist and member of the UN and UNESCO. Grace Kelly was a client, Lady Bird Johnson was a client. You get the idea. In 1957, Hills sold most of his business ventures to embark on what he called a spiritual journey and to write books. Each of these works extrapolated his own interpretations on New Age, occult, and even theological topics. In 1960, he had accumulated a large metaphysical library from books mostly obtained from a well-known occult bookstore in New York called Samuel Weiser Books. Hills penned 30 books on New Age and occult topics such as consciousness, world government, yoga and meditation, divination, and mind reading, which he called telethought. In 1962, he founded the Commission for Research into the Creative Faculties of Man, which is a modern-day version of the Society for Psychical Research, founded by two occultists, Edmund Rogers and William F. Barrett, in the late 19th century, where they studied hypnotism, telepathy, mediumship, thought transference, paranormal activity, and more. In the 1970s, Hills created a device called the supersensonic magnetron, an instrument not unlike L. Ron Hubbard's electropsychometer, or the E-meter. The magnetron was like a dowsing rod, but for people, of which the compass-like pendulum, he believed, could not only scan a person's quote-unquote emanation, but could also be used to, quote, transmit etheric information to bring about manifestations, end quote. Manifestations of what exactly? The device comes with detailed instructions, of which later versions had a word mysteriously blanked out. This may have come after the way other occult hucksters of radionics like Ruth Drown, Wilhelm Reich, and Peter Kelly were treated by the FDA and AMA after being prevented from making wild claims on their devices. The missing word is sigil, revealing that he claimed his device was a legitimate medical and scientific instrument, but was nothing more than a glorified Ouija board. 3 years after Jamaica's declaration of independence from Britain in 1962, Hills moves back to London, where he starts a massive New Age commune at the promptings of two of his mentors, Illuminist and eugenicist Bertrand Russell, and esotericist and anthroposophist, a man considered the founding father of the New Age movement, Sir George Trevelyan, 4th Baronet, which he called Centre House. Russell and Trevelyan helped Hills find and purchase a 6-story Edwardian building in London's stately upper-scale town of Kensington. The Centre House was considered a quote-unquote experiment in group consciousness, where most of the residents were well-educated students, teachers, and scientists interested in converging science and spirituality. There, Hills wrote what he believed was his magnum opus, titled Nuclear Evolution. It's a cover-to-cover rehash of Alice A. Bailey's New Age theosophical and Rosicrucian nonsense, including the chakras and the kundalinis and the Rainbow Bridge that I've talked about in some of my other videos. If you want more information on the Rainbow Bridge, watch my What Time Is It at the UN Headquarters video. I get into it a little deeper there. The Rainbow Bridge is the crossover point on man's journey from primitive animal man to an enlightened divine being. Look at these images from Hill's book, page after page of nonsensical, schizophrenic ramblings. This is the world establishment elite's replacement for Christianity as the new world religion. Their perfect synthesis of occult illuminism and scientism. Just in case you want a clarification on that, this is endorsed by the UN, by the way. Hills goes on to organize the World Conference on Scientific Yoga in 1970, which is this conclave of scholars, scientists, and philosophers. And all these swamis and yogis are brought over, and the movement just explodes in America. Hills writes another book that made India pretty angry, actually, called Christ Yoga, a book that links Christ's teachings to those of the Buddha and the Vedas. He then becomes president of the World Yoga Society and starts giving talks at the UN. In 1973, he opens his New Age occult scientism school called the University of the Trees in Boulder Creek, California, after his good friend Laura Huxley, widow of Aldous Huxley, encouraged him to move to the United States. The school was dedicated to communal living, environmental studies, and tons of pseudo-psycho-spiritual scientific mumbo-jumbo on New Age consciousness and mysticism and pyramid research. while in America, Hills gives talks and lectures all over the country. Now, on a side note, when you hear these people throw around the word consciousness, understand that these people are atheists. To them, man has no spirit, no soul. Everything is mind. So consciousness is the atheist humanist version of the soul, and they want yours. Back in 1965, Hills partnered with socialist, evolutionist, and surrealist painter Hiroshi Nakamura to form the Microalgae International Union in order to promote and sell their newly patented formula for supplements made from green algae, which he called, quote-unquote, a miraculous superfood. In 1975, Hills wrote a book titled Food from Sunlight, where he explained world hunger can end with sustainable food that comes from lakes, seas, and backyard aquaculture. Both men, we are repeatedly told, are scientists holding doctorates. I'm hard-pressed to believe formally trained material scientists would engage themselves in a lifelong career of lunatic fringe pseudosciences, and yet here we are. Their website explains Hill's philosophy on his superfood. Quote, how can such a simple organism be so revolutionary? It helps to look back to the story of algae and its role in creation of life on Earth. 3.5 billion years ago, our planet was a primordial lifeless orb of dust and gases that had one big asset, the neighboring sun. From the solar light came life. The earliest life forms were bacteria, and from these emerged single-cell algae that learned how to split themselves and multiply. Plants, trees, forests evolved, and so did fish and reptiles that fed on them. The algae was so nutritious it propelled brain development in animals and eventually humans. Every strand of spirulina carries this ancient legacy of life. Just as algae created life, so now it can save it, end quote. So Hills and his foundation, which is still in operation today, want you to believe that all life emerged from pond scum. Pond scum is not only a miraculous sustainable superfood that will save humanity, but it's also a renewable fuel for when the planet's oil supply runs out. It's a superfood, it's a superfuel.
New shimmer is a floor wax.
No, new shimmer is a dessert topping.
It's a floor wax.
It's a dessert topping.
The goal of his research lab was to develop a superfood that they can put in supplement form. He discovered that there were women in Africa who harvest algae from lakes to make DA, a highly nutritious sun-baked biscuit. The Mayans did this too. Hills and Nakamura collected samples from lakes in Ethiopia and developed a seed culture for a strain of 70% algae called spirulina. He collected a variety of strains of the stuff which he hybridized in his lab to create an optimal strain for commercial cultivation. To mass produce the stuff and sell it commercially, he started the Light Force Company in Santa Cruz, California, and other manufacturing facilities. Spirulina madness took hold and made him a very, very rich man. I'm willing to bet that most of you watching this right now believe that spirulina is a powerful superfood. And the website doesn't seem to work. When you click here, nothing happens. If you click on any of the research tabs, nothing happens. It goes nowhere. In 1982, Hills settled a claim with the California Department of Health Services for false advertising on the benefits of spirulina. Hills died in 1996. Stanley Greenberg must have been a smitten kitten to use Christopher Hill's superfood philosophy in two of the highest-grossing films of that time. So who is Greenberg? Well, he served in the military in World War II, was considered an intellectual, a socialist evolutionist, and a political activist. He attended Brown University on the GI Bill, and by 1961 was working as a press agent for American Zionist groups. His dramas were inspired and influenced by his deep commitment to political causes, including nuclear disarmament, social justice, and Zionism, of which the latter might explain his numerous productions that involve espionage and intrigue. Now, I'm not referring to the legitimate movement of Torah-observing Semitic people seeking sanctuary from religious persecution and who have an ancestral tie to the region. I'm talking about the wholly corrupted, oligarchical, counterfeit movement by atheist, non-Semitic European elites whose devotion is to the British World Empire, while standing deceptively and geopolitically upon an ancestral foundation that doesn't belong to them. A movement funded and facilitated by a very, very small group of families and wealthy elites who represent the tippy top of the pyramid, the society of the elect, as it were, a fait accompli of which the goal is the material building of the land of Israel with widely expanded territories to further the New World Order. This includes the plan to rebuild Solomon's temple for the appointment of their very human future Messiah king, whom Christians recognize as the Antichrist and Muslims recognize as the Dajjal.